Earlier this week, Dana White announced that the UFC would be heading to Saudi Arabia for a fight night on June 22nd, headlined by Khamzat Chimaev taking on Robert Whittaker. He also announced 4 other fights with Sergei Pavlovich taking on Alexander Volkov, Kelvin Gastelum taking on Daniel Rodriguez, Johnny Walker, Volkan Oezdemir, and then Sharabullet with his second UFC fight against Ihor Potieria. So far, it looks like it's going to be a great card. Obviously, a stacked main event here in the number one contender fight between Khamzat and Robert Whittaker. Great matchmaking there, and it seems like they're actually going to be putting in some effort into this fight night, which is something we haven't seen with a lot of these Apex cards. Who knew? They just needed that Saudi Arabia money to finally kick them out of the Apex. But the card's looking great so far. Just wanted to go through some of these matchups, give some early predictions, and just talk through these matchups. So starting off with the main event, Khamzat Chimaev taking out Robert Whittaker. Super interesting stylistically. I think they already announced that this would be the number one contender fight, so likely going to face the winner of DDP taking on Izzy. Seems like that's the direction the UFC wants to go, but I feel like this is a super interesting fight because there are a lot of question marks on both sides just with this matchup. For Khamzat Chimaev, we just have a really small sample size of him at 185, and specifically fighting at 185 against higher level opponents. Will he have the same dominance we've seen with him against the 170 fighters, going up against the bigger guys in the 185-pound division? We know he was at 185 in his last fight, but he was fighting Kamaru Usman, who, like we all know, is a welterweight. And then also, this is a main event, so it's going to be 5 rounds. Does Khamzat Chimaev have that 5-round cardio, or is his main, or only path to victory going to be getting Robert Whittaker out of there early? Does he have any shot at winning a 5-round fight? I know a lot of people are going to point to that Usman fight where he seemed very, very tired after 3 rounds. I've seen so many people talking about, if it was 5 rounds, Usman would have won. And yes, I think that's true. Like if you just told them when they were in the cage, you're going for round 4, round 5, Usman would have won, but that's not the fight, right? Khamzat Chimaev went into it in a 3-round fight, dominated the first round, I think won the second round and lost the third. So if he knew it was going to be a 5-round fight, he could have definitely fought differently. So I don't think, that's a great argument of like, he was tired at the end of the Usman fight. But in general, right, Usman, Burns, Khamzat's cardio has not been great. And then for Robert Whittaker, some of the question marks: will his ground game be able to hold up against Khamzat Chimaev? We saw DDP take him down. He has had good takedown defense in the past, though. We know the Yoel Romero fights in 2017, 2018. He was impressive. But even though Romero's the more accomplished wrestler, just in terms of pure wrestling, in terms of transitioning that into MMA, I wouldn't say he's like a top-tier MMA grappler, just because he didn't go to it a ton, I think because he didn't want to risk gassing out, which kind of makes sense. I think Khamzat is the better MMA grappler. And then the other question mark for Whittaker here is just going to be his durability. He has been in some wars over the last 7 years. These are all fights within the last 7 years. He had the 2 wars with Yoel Romero. He was knocked out by Izzy. He was dropped by Darren Till, dropped by Izzy in their rematch. He was knocked out by DDP, and then he was rocked in that most recent fight against Paulo Costa. So even though the chin held up with that wheel kick from Paulo, it's just a lot of damage that he's accumulated. And at some point, right, that chin's going to go, and it could be in an upcoming fight within the next few opportunities here for Robert Whittaker. I think when we're looking at both these guys' path to victory, Khamzat's definitely seems like going out there, just finishing Whittaker very early on in the first round, taking him down, either submitting him, ground and pound, just getting him out of there early. And then Robert Whittaker's path to victory seems to be weathering that early storm. Khamzat gets tired, Whittaker has the better cardio, is able to keep him up on the feet in the second, third, fourth, maybe 5th round, and find a finish somewhere in there where Khamzat's gassed. At this point, I think the big question is just, can Whittaker actually survive that first round? We know we saw Kamaru Usman do it, Gilbert Burns do it. Can Khamzat actually finish these high-level guys super quickly? I think, you can make the argument that he didn't do it to Usman, he didn't do it to Burns, he's not going to do it to Whittaker, but I think Burns is an interesting scenario just because Khamzat seemed to really be threatened by Gilbert Burns' jiu-jitsu and kind of wanted no part of it. It's not like Gilbert was amazing at stuff in the takedowns. Khamzat had him down and kind of let him up once Gilbert started throwing up submissions. And then for Usman, just a very, very high-level wrestler. I'm not sure if Whittaker's on the same level with his ground game. He might be. We just really haven't seen it as of late, pretty much outside of the Yoel Romero fights. So right now, I'm going to lean towards Khamzat getting it done in the first round. But like I said, if Whittaker can survive, I think he has a great opportunity, second, third, fourth, fifth round, go into decision. I feel like all of that would favor him if he can survive the early onslaught from Khamzat Chimaev. Now, in the co-main event, it was announced that Sergei Pavlovich would be taking on Alexander Volkov. There have been recent reports that neither Pavlovich or Volkov knew that this fight was happening or was announced, which is not surprising at this point given the UFC. It's pretty whack that they announce these fights. The fighters haven't agreed to it. The fans get excited, and then it puts pressure on the fighters to accept the fight. It's a scummy business practice, but they do it. So I'm going to be talking about this fight as if it is happening. We originally thought it was going to be Volkov taking on Almeida on a different card. Now potentially Sergei taking on Volkov. If this fight does happen, it should be a fun fight on the feet. In terms of a prediction, I'd have to be leaning pretty heavily towards Sergei Pavlovich. I think Aspinall is the only heavyweight fighter that I would take in a stand-up fight over Sergei Pavlovich. Maybe you can make an argument for Ciryl Gane, but I just don't know if he has the power, right? I think he's the more technical guy. If he can drag it out to the second, third round, then Gane probably will have, the advantage there. But Sergei is just a marauder. He is crazy powerful. And if Ciryl Gane isn't, have the threat to put him out right away, I think Sergei would probably win that one, but it's close. But my point being here is that I'm not going to take Volkov in a striking fight over Sergei Pavlovich, and I don't think Volkov has the skill set to push a grappling heavy game plan, which is probably what most fighters are going to need to be able to do against Sergei Pavlovich. I know Volkov showed some improvements against Tai Tuivasa, but, the physicality of Tai Tuivasa is not comparable to the physicality of Sergei Pavlovich. We saw him go up against probably the best wrestler in the division in Curtis Blades. It did not go well for Curtis. Sergei knocked him out in the first round. And we just can't forget, prior to the Aspinall loss, Sergei Pavlovich had 6 straight first-round knockouts, and over legit guys, right? 3 dudes maybe unranked or towards the bottom of the top 15, but also 3 knockout wins against Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, and Tai Tuivasa. So pretty strong competition. I would heavily be favoring Sergei Pavlovich here, but it'll be good to see him back. Obviously a super exciting fighter to watch. The next fight that was announced was Kelvin Gastelum taking on Daniel Rodriguez. Kind of surprising matchmaking just because Daniel Rodriguez has gotten 2 decently high-level opponents in his last 2 fights, and he's coming off of losses to both of them, Neil Magny and Ian Gary, and he was finished in both of those losses. So it's a little odd that he's getting a big opportunity against Kelvin Gastelum. Even though Gastelum isn't ranked, just in terms of his name and his skill level, I do think he's a top 15 fighter at 170. And I do like that Kelvin Gastelum is staying down at 170, even though he lost to Sean Brady pretty dominantly. He had the rough stretch at 185 to kind of end that run. He obviously had the great title fight against Izzy, but since then, it hadn't been great. I just think this is his, this is the division he should be fighting at based on his frame. It seemed like him being up at 185 was just a lack of discipline in getting the weight off. So I like this for Kelvin Gastelum. My early lean here would probably be going with Gastelum, maybe by decision or a late finish, but I would lean towards Gastelum in this matchup. Then we have a fight at light heavyweight with Johnny Walker taking on Volkan Oezdemir. I think this fight just makes a lot of sense. You have Walker fighting down in the rankings off a loss. You have Oezdemir fighting up in the rankings off a win. It's probably going to be a quick finish on either side. I could see either dude winning. I expect the betting line to be pretty close, but Johnny Walker had looked really solid in his few fights leading up to the Magomed Ankalaev loss. Volkan's been a little less consistent, very up and down, so I'll give the slight edge to Johnny Walker, but like I said, I feel like either of these dudes could be out cold within the first few minutes of the fight. And then the final matchup that was announced, Sharabullet taking on Ihor Potieria. A lot of hype behind Sharabullet. I think some people thought he might be getting a ranked opponent for this card. I think this is a decent step up in competition. Actually, scratch that. I think it's a decent matchup here. I don't really think it's a step up in competition. I mean, getting Bruno Silva in your first UFC fight's pretty crazy. He had the W. I think this is kind of a showcase spot for Sharabullet. The only weakness he showed in his UFC debut was his takedown defense, not the typical weakness you're getting out of these Russian fighters, but it was his takedown defense. His striking is super exciting, super diverse. The takedown defense was the issue. He was taken down 3 times, controlled, and that was by Bruno Silva, who is not a grappler, right? He's a striker. He's a knockout artist. I think this is a showcase spot because I don't think Ihor is going to push the grappling, and maybe if he is, I don't think he's going to have a ton of success. He has not landed a single takedown in his 5 UFC fights, so if they're just going to stand out there and have a kickboxing match, I think you gotta favor Sharabullet here. I think they're setting him up for a pretty flashy knockout here over Ihor Potieria, so I like Sharabullet in that matchup. Overall, if all these matchups stick around, and assuming they're all confirmed, hopefully sometime soon, I really like this card. It's good to see them getting out of the Apex and really putting a very strong card together. We just have not been getting main events of this quality on fight nights, so it's good to see that back. Khamzat, Chimaev, Robert Whittaker, super excited for that one. Let me know how you guys are feeling about this card. Do you like it? Who do you have in the main event? The other fights? Let me know down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.